Hi everyone, welcome back. A warm welcome to everyone and welcome back to the Art of Business English. Now, this week I have another useful episode for you. We're going to be looking at how we can use the present continuous for future plans as well as the present simple. Okay, so pretty simple grammar, however, maybe not as simple as you think. Okay, so you may be wondering how we can use the present tenses for future actions. In fact, you may be quite confused about how native English speakers use the present continuous for future plans, okay? So, the question is, haven't we been taught that the present continuous is for actions that we are currently doing in the present? Huh? Well, if you've ever been confused about the present continuous and the present simple being used to talk about the future, then don't worry, because in today's episode, we're going to explain in detail the similarities and differences between how we can use these tenses in English and how it's used in Spanish, okay? So by the end of this episode, we will have covered the following: grammar overview of the present continuous and simple present, the difference between how they are used in Spanish and English, some common examples of how we use them for future, and some common time expressions which are very important. And I'll give you guys some example sentences in context. So let's get started. Let's start by looking at the present continuous. So the present continuous basically has the following structure. As you know, in affirmative, we start with the subject. We're using the verb to be, so am, is, or are, depending on the subject, plus a verb in gerund and then an object. And we have the contracted form, which is very common in spoken English. So I'm, your, his, she's, we're, there, or there. So an example would be, he's arriving this afternoon. And in the negative form, it's pretty much exactly the same. So the subject plus the verb to be, am, is, or are, plus not, and then a verb with ing and an object. So isn't and aren't would be the contracted forms in negative. So she's not holding the meeting until next week. And then in the interrogative form, we've got am, is, or are, plus the subject, plus verb with ing, and the object. Now, as you know, there's not really any contracted forms in questions. So an example would be, are you attending the event? Okay. So remember that the contracted form of the present continuous is very common in spoken English. And another interesting aspect of pronunciation is that when we pronounce the ing form of verbs, we often only pronounce the in. So let me give you an example. Okay, native people do this a lot. I'm having a party would be I'm having, not I'm having. I'm having a party, okay? So we do that quite often. The same with going to, I'm gonna, I'm having, I'm doing. Okay, so this is very common amongst native people. We sort of cut the G off the end of the progressive verb ing and only pronounce the in. Okay, so we do know that the present continuous is used for talking about actions that you're currently doing in the present. For example, now I am talking to you. However, we can use the present continuous for the future, and that is what we're going to be focusing on today. So basically, the present continuous for future is used in the following way. It's for talking about plans that are already made. So Jill and John are flying in next week. Okay, Jill and John are flying in next week. Okay, so that's a plan. It's been made. They obviously already have the tickets, and they're coming in on a plane next week, okay? We can also use it to talk about future plans that are usually put in a diary. So the new CEO is starting on Monday, okay? So that's something that's official. It goes into a diary, and it's something that's going to happen in the future, but we can use the present continuous is starting, okay? And we also use the present continuous to ask people about their plans. This is very common in English. So for example, I can say to you, are you attending the meeting this afternoon? Are you attending the meeting this afternoon? So yes, very common to ask people about this. I mean, in Spanish, you can say ¿Qué estás haciendo este fin de semana? Okay? What are you doing this weekend? But it's not very common in Spanish to ask people what they're doing using the present continuous, okay? And there are some common or very common verbs which are used when talking about the present continuous for future plans. So some of those common ones are the following. Have is very common. Hold is also very common. Visit is commonly used. Work is commonly used. See, the ver, okay? See the ver. Do is also very common. Help, okay? Leave, very common in the present continuous. Fly, for business. Come is also very common. And attend, okay? Attend in Spanish is asistir, so it's not assist, okay? It's different. So now that we understand how we can use the present continuous, okay, for expressing the future, let's take a look at the simple present for future use, okay? So the present simple is super simple, okay? I think it's the structure's clear. I'm sure that most of you know the present simple structure. So remember, just simply put, it's subject plus verb plus object, and in the negative form and interrogative form, we use do or does with most verbs. However, there are some exceptions, and the exceptions are to be, must, can, and have got. Okay, you can't use auxiliaries do or does with these 4 special verbs. So, how do we use the present simple for future? Well, we do it basically in the following way. Okay, so when we are talking about travel plans, timetables, programs, basically things that cannot change in the future, then we would use the present simple. So just to give you an example, the bus leaves at 8 a.m. tomorrow, okay? That's a travel plan or a schedule. Now remember, a schedule is un horario, okay? And we can also use the present simple when we want to talk about official plans and schedules, okay? So the president arrives next week. That's an official plan, and we can use the present simple. Okay, now the present simple is used in much the same way as in Spanish. However, there are some differences as well as similarities. But before we move on and look at those, I want to quickly cover temporals, okay? Because temporals, they often cause a lot of problems for Spanish speakers, okay? And I'm going to explain why. So, what are temporals? But basically, like, temporals are the expressions such as when, okay, as soon as, the moment, okay, so these types of things are temporals. And the first thing that you need to understand is that in English, we do not have the subjunctive form. And, you need to really appreciate and understand that, okay, because in most cases in English, we would probably use the present simple or the present perfect. So super important that you guys, or that you understand that the subjunctive form doesn't exist. So basically this means that future tenses cannot be used in a future clause with these following words, okay? When, cuando, as soon as, tan pronto como. The moment, again, that's like tan pronto como. After, después. When, once, una vez. Before, antes. Until, hasta. While, mientras. And by the time, which basically means when, which is cuando. Okay, but by the time is a bit special. It's a little bit outside of the context of this episode, but by the time basically means when, which is cuando. So the verb that follows these temporals must stay in the present simple or the present perfect form. So let me elaborate with some examples because I'm sure it's going to be much easier for you. So I'll give her your message when she arrives at the office. So I'll give her your message when she arrives at the office. So that in Spanish will be le diré tu mensaje cuando llegue a la oficina. Okay, so here the verb is cuando llegue. So that the verb llegar is in the subjunctive form after cuando. Another one, you can go for lunch when you've finished the report. You can go for lunch when you have finished the report. So in this case, this tense is used to emphasize that the first action is finished before the other one starts. So the translation will be puedes ir a comer cuando hayas terminado el informe. So this is the subjunctive form hayas terminado, okay? Now, in both cases we can see that the verb after cuando or when in Spanish is followed by a verb in the subjunctive form llegue or hayas. Now, the problem arises with English because a non-native speaker, they generally assume that because we're talking about a future event, we need to put a future clause after when. And this is not the case. So, as such, the common mistake is that people would say something like, when she will arrive at the office, or when you will finish the report. Okay, so it's very common for people to put will after cuando or when, or tan pronto como, as soon as, and things like that. Okay, you don't put will or a future clause after these temporals. You must put the present simple or the present perfect. Okay, so super important because that is very often confused, and that's a common mistake. Now, as long as you're aware of this problem, as long as you're aware of this, you won't have any problems. Okay, and if you do make the mistake, you'll still be understood by a native person. Okay, they'll still understand that you're referring to future actions here, but it just sounds a bit wrong to a native person. Okay, so very important that we understand the use of temporals in English. Okay, so let's move on and take a look at some common time expressions which are used with these two tenses, and then I'll cover how they're used in comparison with Spanish. Okay, so it's very important to use time expressions when using both the present continuous and the present simple for future use. Why, you may be asking? Well, put simply, time expressions help us indicate to the listener that we are talking about the future and not present actions. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the present simple, you generally use it for things that are happening now. Okay, or the present continuous is for actions that are in progress at the moment. So you need to use these time expressions to indicate future. And so as you can see in the examples that I've provided earlier, most sentences have a time expression. If a time expression is not given, then usually the listener understands from the context of the conversation that we're referring to plans and actions that will take place in the future. Okay, so generally we put time expressions. If not, it means that the person or the listener already knows from the context of the conversation that we're talking about future. So let's look at some common time expressions. Okay, this week or this month or this summer. Okay, you can change the seasons, the months. Tonight, this evening, tomorrow, tomorrow morning. Now remember, when we say tomorrow morning, we don't say tomorrow in the morning. We say tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, and tomorrow night. We never put tomorrow in the morning, never put tomorrow in the afternoon, and we never put tomorrow at night. Okay, we just put tomorrow and then morning, afternoon, or night. Next one will be next week, next month, next year. Okay, you can change that. You can put a season as well, next winter. At the weekend or on the weekend is another time expression. In January, or you can put any month, so as long as it's a month in the future. In a few minutes, so de aquí unos pocos minutos. In a few hours. In a few days, okay? On Thursday, so that it's very simple, just on Thursday. My flight arrives on Thursday. It's in the future. On Wednesday morning, etc. Okay, so there's lots of time expressions, and those are some common ones that we can use to indicate that we are referring to things in the future. So in the next part of this episode, I'm going to show you the similarities and differences between English and Spanish when using the present continuous and simple present for future use. So here really is the most important part. Okay, so the first thing that I need to point out is that most of the problems arise with the use of the present continuous for future use, okay? It's very uncommon in Spanish to use the present continuous for future use, while in English it is completely the opposite. So let me give you an example. And forgive me if my Spanish is wrong, but I think it's okay. So this Friday, I'm flying to Berlin on business, okay? So this Friday, I'm flying to Berlin on business. So this sentence in English sounds fantastic and completely natural, okay? However, let's translate that directly into Spanish. Este viernes estoy volando a Berlín para negocios. So, I mean, that doesn't sound very good, does it, in Spanish? I mean, estoy volando, okay? So herein lies the problem, basically. We apply a different form of the future in Spanish, and we would probably say something like, este viernes me voy a Berlín para negocios, okay? So we can clearly see that we are using the verb in Spanish to go, voy, which is pretty much present simple. I mean, you can use voy, the going to, but me voy, to me, sounds like it's present simple, and the present progressive form really sounds very unnatural, okay, in Spanish. So here we must, if we want to speak English, we have to get used to using the present continuous in English. When I say get used to, I mean acostumbrarse, right? Acostumbrarse. So that's to get used to using the present continuous, okay? And let's have a quick look at, I'm going to give you guys a comparative, okay? So we are holding an investor meeting this week, okay? So we are holding an investor meeting this week. That sounds great in English. In Spanish, estamos celebrando una reunión de inversores esta semana. So, estamos celebrando una reunión de inversores esta semana. Doesn't sound fantastic, does it? I'm seeing John this Thursday. Okay, I am seeing John this Thursday. Sounds great and natural in English. Estoy viendo John este jueves. That doesn't sound very good in Spanish, does it? Okay. Are you attending the conference next week? Are you attending the conference next week? ¿Estás asistiendo la conferencia la semana que viene? So, you can see from this comparative that you need to be careful, because if you do the translation, it sounds terrible in Spanish, but you need to be aware that in English it's very common to use these verbs and expressions, and it sounds perfect, okay? It sounds great. So now let's have a look then at the present simple, okay? Because we can see that there are some differences also with that. So firstly, with Spanish, we can use the present simple even though we are referring to the future. For example, I could say to you, te llamo más tarde, okay? So, te llamo más tarde. Here, we're using present simple of the verb to call, okay? This is incorrect in English. So as you may have learnt in episode 29 of this podcast, we would use the future form will, okay? You can't use the present simple to express a future action this way in English. So remember, we use the present simple for official plans or for schedules such as flights or the flight, a bus or a train, times, things like that, okay? So in this regard, the present simple is very similar to Spanish. For example, my flight arrives on Monday at 9 p.m. Mi vuelo llega lunes a las 9 de la tarde. Okay, so that pretty much is the same, okay? So, there are some similarities. If we are talking about schedules and things like that, then in Spanish it is pretty much the same, okay? So in summary, we can't use the present simple for future actions unless it is for official timetabled events or plans, or for things like travel arrangements and schedules, okay? If we're talking about immediate future and things like that in English, then we need to use will, okay? So if you want to refresh your understanding of will for future use in English, then check out episode 29, okay? So let's wrap up this episode with some example sentences in context. So the present simple in a meeting. We have the meeting on Monday at 10 a.m., okay? For travel, your flight leaves next Tuesday at 6 a.m. And simple present for negotiations. As soon as you sign, okay, so temporal here, the paperwork, so as soon as you sign the paperwork, my team will arrange the order. you can see that we've used a future will clause after the first clause. However, as soon as, then we need to put the verb in present simple because it's one of the temporal verbs, okay? Temporal expressions. So the present continuous, the sales team is meeting at the end of the month, okay? So that's a future action that's happening. We've got the future clause, time expression there, end of the month, okay? For travel, present continuous, I'm flying out on Friday for 3 days. So I am flying out on Friday for 3 days. Sounds great in English. Now, present continuous for negotiations. They are signing the revised agreement in the next few days. So they are signing. They're not signing now. They're doing it in the next few days. Okay? So, again, present continuous for future use. Now, some final thoughts. Well, basically that brings us to the end of this episode, and I hope you found the content interesting and useful as always. And remember, you can start to put this grammar into practice straight away. Okay, I'm sure most of you, or you personally, understand the structure for the present continuous and the present simple, and I'm sure you understand it well, so you shouldn't have any problems starting to put it into practice. Okay, my recommendation as always is to start by writing down some simple yet common expressions that you can use in your next meeting or your telephone call or email. It's basically a really super way and it's super simple. And it's a great feeling when you can easily master a new grammar set or grammar aspect that you may not have really used in the past. So this is something that you can really implement quickly and easily. Okay, and as always, I encourage you to share this episode with your friends and colleagues and families. I look forward to your comments as always, so please send them through. Reply to my emails or put them up on the AOBE website. And if you'd like to appear on the AOBE podcast, then please let me know, as we're interested in offering you, our listeners, live coaching sessions, okay, which will form part of our podcast. And, so if you really want to get engaged, let us know, as we love to help you guys out. And lastly, before I go, if you're not aware, we're working on developing some premium content for our listeners. So keep an eye out for that, okay? Because we'll be launching the AOBE Masters program soon. So that's all we have time for today. I hope it was great, and I really look forward to seeing you guys next week in next week's episode. It's a pleasure having you here, and I hope you guys have a great week with your friends and family. Take care now, and we'll see you soon.